Camille Ashford was 39 years old when her father-in-law took her hand in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and cold coffee and told her, in a voice worn down to its last thread, not to trust his own son. Everyone in Charlotte who knew the Ashfords believed they understood that family completely. Walter Ashford had built Ashford Structural Group from a single pickup truck and a hand-lettered business license into one of the most respected engineering firms in the Carolinas. And everyone assumed his son Terence, sharp-suited and quick with a handshake, was next in line to run it. Camille was just Terence's wife. She drove a 9-year-old Honda Pilot with a cracked visor. She packed her own lunch before Tuesday site inspections. His mother called her sweet, steady Camille at every holiday dinner, and Terence never once corrected the description. Because a wife who disappeared into the wallpaper was easier to manage than one people noticed. What none of them noticed, not even Terence, was the second engineering license Camille kept quietly renewed under her maiden name. Or the fact that her own grandfather had designed half the load-bearing structures Ashford Structural Group still serviced 2 decades after his death. 14 months into his father's illness, $410,000 moved out of accounts Terence believed only he understood, most of it toward a downtown apartment lease he told his father was a company investment. What Terence never thought to ask, not once in 11 years of marriage, was why his father had started calling Camille alone on Sunday afternoons, or what single document his father's attorney had quietly amended 6 weeks before he died. What happened when Terence walked through the boardroom doors 8 months later would cost him a great deal more than his father's blessing. He would learn it in front of everyone who mattered to him. He would learn exactly how much his father had seen, and exactly how little he had. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came in low over the back deck Camille had designed and built herself the summer after her grandfather died, board by board, using the same joints he had taught her when she was 12 years old and too small to swing a hammer properly. She sat with her coffee cooling in both hands and watched the fog lift off the yard, and she thought, as she often did in that particular quiet, of something her grandfather used to say. A structure only fails where somebody cut a corner nobody could see. He had said it about buildings. She had learned, over 11 years of marriage, that it applied to almost everything else too. Inside, she could hear Terence getting ready for a client breakfast that didn't appear on the calendar she still kept for both of them, out of old habit. He came into the kitchen smelling faintly of a cologne she didn't remember buying him, kissed her cheek the way he always did, warm and quick and slightly too rehearsed, and asked if she'd started the invoices for the Belmont project. She said she had. He tilted his phone face down against the counter when she reached past him for the coffee pot, a small, practiced motion she'd stopped noticing months ago. "Big breakfast?" she asked. "Just a permit contact," he said. "Nothing exciting." She didn't ask which permit contact took client meetings at 7 in the morning. He didn't offer anything else. He rarely did anymore. Her other phone, older and plainer than the one she carried for the firm, stayed in the zippered inside pocket of her work bag where it had stayed for 3 years, unknown to him, holding a license, a folder of correspondence with her grandfather's old attorney, and very little else. It wasn't a secret so much as a room she had simply never invited him into. She had built her career the way her grandfather taught her to build anything worth keeping, quietly, with the load-bearing parts hidden from view, so that only the person who designed it ever really knew what was holding the whole thing up. She had met Terence at a ribbon cutting for a community center her grandfather's crew had framed, back when Terence was 28 and still asked good questions instead of performing answers. He'd complimented the joinery on the entry archway before he even knew who had built it. And something about a man noticing craftsmanship before he noticed a name had made her let her guard down for the first time in years. She married him 14 months later in a courthouse. No fuss. Exactly the way she liked things. That version of Terrence was real. She had never doubted that. She had only slowly stopped believing he was still in there. Walter had liked her from the beginning, in a way Terrence's mother took years to warm to. 2 years into the marriage, Walter had pulled her aside at a company barbecue, pointed across the lot at a beam detail on a half-finished warehouse, and asked what she thought was wrong with it. She'd told him, plainly, the way her grandfather had taught her to talk about buildings. Walter had laughed, delighted, and told his foreman later that week, loud enough for half the office to hear, that his son had married the best engineer on the payroll and hadn't even noticed. It became a small joke between them after that, repeated at holidays. Camille had always assumed it stayed exactly that. A joke. She had no idea Walter had been quietly taking notes the whole time. She'd installed a small camera by the front door 2 winters earlier, after a string of package thefts up and down their block. More habit than real security. It had sat there so long recording empty afternoons in delivery trucks that she'd nearly forgotten it existed at all. Walter's diagnosis had come 8 months earlier, quiet and terminal. And Camille had watched her husband handle it the way he handled everything that threatened to cost him something. At a careful distance, phone in hand, already 3 steps ahead of the grief. At the hospital, he sat by his father's bed and spoke softly about the business, about succession, about timelines, while Walter watched him with the tired, clear-eyed patience of a man who had built too many things not to recognize when one had a hairline crack running straight through its foundation. Her phone buzzed against the counter that Tuesday morning, an unfamiliar Charlotte number, followed 30 seconds later by a text preview she caught before it disappeared. Ms. Ashford, this is Walter's office calling regarding the amended documents we discussed. The message cut off there. Terrence's keys were already jingling by the door. She slid the phone into her pocket without a word and said she'd be right behind him to the office, same as every other Tuesday. She called the number back from the parking lot before she went inside. The paralegal on the other end was polite and careful, and told her only that Mr. Ashford's attorney would need to speak with her directly, and that the call had gone to her in error. Camille thanked her, hung up, and sat in the Honda for a long moment, with her hands steady on the wheel, the way they always were. Something had shifted. She didn't know the shape of it yet. She only knew, the way she always knew when a structure was about to reveal a flaw, that it was coming. That evening, she stayed late reconciling invoices for the Belmont project, the way she did every week. Quiet in a corner office nobody at the firm thought to look at twice. Going line by line through the company's shared accounts, she noticed a recurring monthly transfer to an entity called Riverside Flats, LLC, going back 14 months. Her hands didn't shake. She wrote the account number down on the back of an invoice and kept working. She went home and, instead of asking Terrence a single question, she opened her laptop after he'd gone to bed and pulled up 18 months of statements. $34,000 had moved to Riverside Flats in careful, deliberate increments, never large enough on any single date to trigger the kind of automatic flag the bank might notice, always just under it. A leasing company confirmed, when she called posing as a prospective tenant checking references, that the unit was a 2-bedroom corner apartment currently occupied, leased under a name she didn't recognize but paid, month after month, from an account she did. A company credit card, the one meant only for client entertainment, showed dinner charges at an uptown steakhouse on 3 separate nights Terrence had told his mother he was at the hospital sitting with his father, and a jeweler's charge for $1,100 logged the same week Walter had been moved into hospice care. The doorbell camera she'd installed 2 winters earlier for package thieves had been quietly saving 30-day clips to a cloud account she still checked out of habit. More than anyone in the house remembered it existed. Scrubbing back through a week she barely recalled, she found 9 minutes of footage from a Wednesday afternoon Terrence had told his mother he was sitting with his father at St. Vincent's, his car pulling into their own driveway at 2:30, a black Range Rover idling at the curb behind it, and Terrence leaning through its passenger window for 4 full minutes before either car moved again. She watched it twice. Her face remained perfectly calm. She found the name 3 days later, not from digging, but from standing in the hallway outside his home office with a laundry basket on her hip, close enough to hear him laugh softly into the phone and say a name. Bianca, followed by, "Once Dad's out of the way, we won't have to be careful anymore." He wasn't talking about the marriage. He was talking about the company. Her face remained perfectly calm. She finished folding the towels and went to bed. She did not confront him. She photographed the statements. She forwarded 3 months of transfer confirmations to a private email address only she checked. She downloaded the credit card records before the billing cycle refreshed and might have quietly reset them. 10 months of calculated deception unfolded in front of her. Longer and more organized than she had let herself imagine, and by the time she finished laying it all out chronologically on a single page, it read less like a marriage falling apart and more like a project plan for taking something that was never his to take. She opened a new folder on her desktop and named it simply Riverside. She had no idea, sitting alone at that kitchen table at midnight, how much further the folder would eventually reach, past an apartment lease, past a mistress's name, straight into the accounts of clients who had trusted her own stamped signature on their blueprints. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person in Charlotte who had never once been fooled by Terrence Ashford, her Aunt Vivian, her late father's sister, who had sat across from him at exactly one Thanksgiving dinner 12 years earlier, and told Camille afterward, privately, that a man who complimented the tablecloth before he complimented the cook was a man who noticed surfaces and nothing underneath them. Patricia Munro's office sat on the 7th floor of a building downtown with a view of the skyline Camille's grandfather had helped raise a piece of, decades before either woman sat across that desk from each other. Patricia had a reputation in Charlotte for taking exactly the cases she believed she could win and turning away everything else, no matter how sympathetic the story. She read through the printed timeline without a single change of expression, the way Camille imagined a good engineer read a stress report, looking for where it would break, not whether it would. When she finished, she set the folder down evenly on the desk and said only, "You built a stronger case than most attorneys bring me, and most of them went to law school." Then she asked one question. "Do you know what your father-in-law changed 6 weeks before he died?" Camille said she didn't. "Then that's the piece we need to find next," Patricia said, "because everything else you've handed me, the apartment, the transfers, the affair, is simply the scaffolding around whatever Walter actually did. Find the load-bearing piece first. Everything else follows from that." Camille recognized the sentence for what it was before Patricia finished saying it. Her grandfather would have said it almost exactly the same way. Aunt Vivian met her 2 days later on the porch of the house Camille had grown up visiting every summer, the one with the oak tree her grandfather had refused to cut down even when it cracked the sidewalk. Vivian was 71 and did not soften anything for anyone anymore. She told Camille that Walter had called her twice in his last 2 months. He'd asked her, of all people, what kind of woman Camille really was underneath the version his son had trained everyone to see. Vivian had told him the truth. She said Walter had gone quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, "Then I know exactly what to do." Vivian looked at her niece on that porch and said the only thing she needed to. "Your grandfather built things to outlast the people who doubted them." It sounds like Walter finally understood that. "Some things," Vivian added, "you don't need to say twice for them to matter." The counter-evidence came from a forensic accountant named Diane Whitfield, a colleague of Patricia's who specialized in construction industry fraud, and who took one look at the Riverside Flats transfers and asked for 6 weeks of client escrow records. What she found was worse than an affair. Terrence had been quietly routing a percentage of client deposit funds, money held in trust for 3 ongoing municipal contracts, through a shell vendor account that fed directly into the same apartment lease and eventually into a jewelry purchase Bianca had posted, unknowingly, on a public social account 11 months earlier. It wasn't infidelity anymore. It was theft from clients whose projects Camille herself had stamped and certified. Diane's report ran to 14 pages. Its conclusion ran to one sentence. This was not a man losing his way. This was a man executing a plan. Halfway through her review, Diane found something else, tucked in a folder Terrence had never bothered to delete from a shared company server. An unfiled, unnotarized document dated 4 months before Walter's death. A crude first attempt at redirecting company shares into Terrence's name alone. Abandoned, it appeared, once he realized his father was lucid enough to notice. It hadn't worked. But it proved, in writing, that the plan had started while his father was still very much alive to be planned around. Patricia read that page twice and said only, "Well, that settles any question of intent." 3 days had passed since the meeting with Diane. By Friday morning, Patricia had a full binder assembled and a formal date requested for the shareholders to convene. Through all of it, Camille went home every night and made dinner. She asked Terrence how his day was. She listened to him complain about a permitting delay on the Belmont site and nodded in the right places, the way she had for 11 years, and set his plate down in front of him the way she always had. She poured his wine and drank her own, and when he mentioned, almost carelessly, that the reading of his father's affairs would happen soon and that he expected he'd finally get to run things the way they should be run, she only smiled and said she was sure he'd handle it well. "You've been quiet lately," he said once, studying her over the rim of his glass, something almost like suspicion flickering behind the words. "Just tired," she said. "Long week at the office." He nodded and let it go, the way he always did, because a wife who never raised her voice had never once given him a reason to look closer. Her hands did not shake. By that Friday, Patricia's office had formally confirmed the date. The following Thursday, the shareholders of Ashford Structural Group would convene. The conference room on the 4th floor of Ashford Structural Group had a wall of windows overlooking the skyline, and by 9 that Thursday morning it held more people than Terrence had been told to expect. He'd been told it was a formality, a signature, coffee and handshakes before the board confirmed what everyone already assumed. Instead, his mother sat near the head of the table, her expression unreadable in the particular way it only went when she already knew something her son didn't. Patricia Munro sat beside an empty chair, a slim leather folder squared perfectly in front of her. Diane Whitfield had a binder in front of her thick enough that Terrence noticed it before he noticed anything else in the room, before he even noticed his Aunt Vivian standing quietly near the window, arms crossed, watching him the way she had watched him at exactly one Thanksgiving dinner 12 years earlier. And at the head of the table, in the chair that had belonged to his father for 31 years, sat Camille. Terrence walked in expecting a formality, a rubber stamp, the closing chapter of a plan 14 months in the making. He walked in and froze. "Sit down, Terrence," his mother said quietly. And he did, because some voices from childhood never fully lose their authority. Patricia laid the documents out one at a time, the way Camille had watched her rehearse in that 7th-floor office. The amended trust, signed and witnessed 6 weeks before Walter's death, transferring 61% controlling interest in Ashford Structural Group into a trust with Camille Ashford as sole trustee. Bank records showing the true destination of 14 months of transfers. Diane's forensic report, laid down last. The client escrow diversion highlighted in a red so plain even Terrence's mother leaned forward to read it herself. "You didn't need to be a structural engineer," Camille said, her voice even and unhurried, to recognize the shape of demolition. "You just needed to know where to look. Your father knew exactly where to look. That's what he called me about, every Sunday, for the last 2 months of his life." Terrence's face moved through several stages in under a minute. Confidence first, then confusion, then something closer to fear, the way a joist looks in the half-second before it gives. He reached for the amended trust document and read the paragraph on controlling interest twice, as if a third read might change the percentage. "Camille, we can talk about this. Whatever you think you know, whatever they've told you." He looked around the room for an ally and found none. He tried his mother first, the way he always had. "Mama, you can't let them do this. This is Dad's company. It's supposed to come to me." His voice had the same practiced warmth he used on new clients, the same tone that had once made Camille believe he noticed craftsmanship before he noticed a name. "It didn't work on this room. He built it for whoever could be trusted to keep it standing," his mother said, and the room went still at the sharpness in her voice. "He told me the same thing he told your aunt, and the same thing he apparently told his lawyer. He just didn't tell you, because he'd stopped believing you'd hear it." Terrence looked at Camille the way a man looks at a door he has just realized was locked from the other side the whole time. "This isn't you," he said, quieter now, almost pleading. "You wouldn't do this to me." "I know what the documents say," she said. "I know what the account records say. Diane can walk you through the escrow numbers if you'd like them read aloud in front of the 2 municipal clients Patricia has already notified." She let that settle. "You had 11 years to see who I was. You chose to see what was convenient. That choice belongs to you now." She stood, gathered the single folder she had brought with her, the original timeline, the one page that started all of it, and walked out of the room she had just been named to run. She had no idea, 3 years earlier, folding towels in a hallway, that this was the room she was building toward. She did not look back. Behind her, the room stayed silent, except for the sound of Terrence's mother sliding the escrow report an inch closer to her son. 8 months later, the Craftsman bungalow on the east side of town had a new deck off the back, wider than the last one, built over 3 long weekends by Camille and a retired framer who used to work for her grandfather. Hardwood floors she'd chosen herself ran through the front rooms. A young Japanese maple stood in the side yard, planted the week she signed the last of the paperwork, making the trusteeship permanent. Ashford Structural Group had grown that year, not smaller as some had quietly predicted, but larger. 2 new municipal contracts worth $11 million combined. A satellite office opened in Greensboro, and a foundation established in her grandfather's name that funded trade apprenticeships for young women in construction and engineering, its first cohort of 9 already on job sites across the county. She had a new partner in her life now, a quiet project architect named Miles Corbett, who had asked good, specific questions the first time they met on a job site and never once tried to perform for her. He didn't need to be the center of any room. He noticed the deck before he noticed the view, the way Terrence once had, except with Miles, the noticing never stopped. He simply showed up in her life, steadily, and stayed there. Word of Terence's ruin reached her the way most things did now, secondhand, without her asking. He'd lost his position at the firm within the month, blocked by the board from any return, and word had traveled fast enough through Charlotte's construction circles that no comparable firm would take him on. He worked project management now for a smaller outfit 2 counties over, a clear step down from where he'd assumed he was headed, and the 2 municipal clients named in Diane's report had quietly declined to work with any firm bearing his name attached. Bianca had left within a year, once the money and the apartment both disappeared, and was said to be back in Colombia, working retail. Terence's own mother did not return his calls for months after that meeting, and when she finally did, it was only to remind him that his father had seen exactly who he was, and that had been the whole point of everything Walter arranged before he died. Camille heard all of it once, registered it, and did not think of it again. On a Sunday morning that fall, she sat on the new deck with coffee cooling in both hands, watching the fog lift the same way it had the morning everything started to change, and she thought of her grandfather's voice one more time. A structure only fails where somebody cut a corner nobody could see. She had spent her whole life building the kind that didn't. She was free. She was solvent. She had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.